Okay, good afternoon, guys. This is another video lesson, unfortunately, because I'm still subbing. I'm here for 2 weeks, as probably mentioned. And then so we will be doing part 3 of bio. For the other assignments, please do them, especially the space and earth science quiz for me. So know where you're at. It is open book. Please use your notes, because then it's a lot easier, and then some of the questions may just happen to come off there. So there you go. So let's get started. This lesson is necessary, but a lot of people don't, depending on your background and what, depending if you agree with it or not. So we'll just get started and we'll go from there. So it's quite controversial, the lesson that we're doing today. So let's first start here. What is the difference between a theory and a law? So it generally starts as a hypothesis. So remember, from scientific methods, a hypothesis is a limited explanation of a phenomenon. So basically what you're trying to test, with background information, of course. And then a scientific theory is an in-depth explanation of that observed phenomenon. So you observe something, and then that's a hypothesis. And then when you have a very in-depth explanation of it, that's a theory. A law, then, is a statement about an observed phenomenon or unifying concept. So it's something that always happens, doesn't change. So then, a scientific law is simply an observation of a phenomenon that the theory attempts to explain. So the law explains the theory. Basically. So sorry, the theory explains the law, but the law is what motors the theory. Yeah. So, for example, if you're lying under an apple tree and observe an apple falling from a branch to the ground, the observation of the phenomenon would be called the law of gravity. The theory is the explanation. Okay? All that for saying, it's important to know the difference, because we are doing evolution today. So evolution is quite controversial in the way people believe it, everything around it. In terms of, do they believe it? Does it still exist? To things like, if God created people, if people created, or for monkeys, why are monkeys still here? Everything like that. So it could be anything, depending on what your point of view is. Yeah. So evolution is just one explanation of how the difference in organisms was created. It isn't the only explanation. Evolution is a theory and not a law. So the evolution is the explanation of an observation, basically. So it's not proven. It's not always true. It's not always present, depending on what you're looking at. So it's a theory, not a law. You may agree with it, believe in it. You may not believe in it or agree with it, but it is present in the scientific world. So you do have to know about it, because it is still a view out there. So have an open mind about it, and then we'll go from there. So other options could be, I just put religion or faith of any form, depending on what it is, because there's so many out there. You don't have to agree with it, but you have to have the knowledge of what this is. Okay. So saying that, please have an open mind with what we're looking at. If you don't agree or believe in it, whatever the case is, please have an open mind, and this is what we'll go through, what they believe created a lot of the animal adaptations that we have today. Not all people, but some people. Okay. So this is just a picture of, the apes going to different monkeys to the cavemen to the humans today. So this is often what you see when you think of evolution, is the creation of man from monkeys, right? So, yeah, just we'll go through that. So evolution was proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859. He published On the Origin of Species. I actually own this book. I haven't read it all because it is quite detailed, but I would love to read it all one day. He observed, he had many trips, place called the Galapagos Islands, which I would love to go to, but one day when we can travel again, maybe we'll go there. Actually, today, because of his work there, there's a limited amount of people that can enter the island and go on certain areas of the island because of what is present on the island. So a lot of species that aren't present anywhere else, we'll go through some of the, we'll later up, there's I think might be even the next slide, of some animals that are present on the island that maybe won't be present elsewhere. So for a long period of time, he took notes of what he observed, how animals ate, what their beaks looked like, their teeth, how they acted, where they lived, everything like that, over a very long period of time, because it just wasn't a short period of time. It's kind of like climate and temperature. So temperature would be your climate would be a long period of time, as opposed to temperature or weather would be a short period of time. So this would be kind of like climate over a long period of time. So actually, he was from London. He proposed the idea of evolution and natural selection when he returned back to London, one of the last times there. But it wasn't just him who did it. We'll go through some of those scientists and their contribution to this. So what he discovered was that there are 4 key points of his theory. So individuals of a species are not identical. They're not the same. So like humans, we're not all the same. Traits are passed from generation to generation. So like you could say whatever trait you get from your grandparents or your parents or your great-great-grandparents. So like my sister and I have negative blood, but no one in my immediate family has negative blood. We learned it comes from my grandfather who has negative blood. So it skipped a generation. So things like that. So from generation to generation. More offspring are born than can survive, especially in animals. You'll notice that more so in like wildlife than humans. Sometimes in humans, but mostly like fish, reptiles, and things like that. Wild animals. Only the survivors of the competition for resources will reproduce. So only the ones who can get the resources they need will reproduce and survive. So these are the 4 main points that he touches on that he observed. Okay, so this here is a picture of the animals that is on the island. This turtle, I don't even have this. Oh, I do have a pointer. This turtle is massive. It's truly massive. It's like 70 kilos or something crazy like that. It's the only found, when it says Galapagos fur seal, penguin, tortoise, things like that, they're only present on the Galapagos Islands. Which is part of the reason why you can only certain people can go on it. Which is crazy. But I would love to go there. Love it. This is a very cool bird. The bottlenose dolphin is present elsewhere, but more so on the island. The snakes, the crab spider, the reef shark, things like that. So these are some of the species present on that island. What a lot of work Darwin did was with finches. We'll go on through that later when we go through changes to type of eating. We'll see that. So, not only did he come up with evolution, but natural selection as well. So there's a couple terms within it. So natural selection is the process of which species adapt to their environments. So it's the engine that drives evolution. This is what allows those species to change, to adapt to what their environment is. Basically. So it's not evolution, but it's the one that drives it. So the one that creates the evolution, creates the changes. So there's an acronym called VISTA. So it'll help you remember the 5 points of natural selection. So we have variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation. We'll go through them. I'll point out which ones are which. I have to finish your notes. I'm almost done them. By the time you see this video, they will be done because you'll have them. And I will have your assignment done for you as well. So let's go through these. So variation. So variation, if you notice in all these pictures here, all these animals are different. And visibly different. So like this is a frog. These are like birds, butterflies, koalas, things like that. The visible variation is a visible difference that may be observed. So these differences are known as variations or variation. So the differences between organisms, like the visible differences. Okay. But there's two types of variation. So variations between species is an interspecific. So inter being inside. Interspecific variation. There are over 8.7 million different species on Earth that we know of. Most of which are plants, insects, and organisms. So with interspecific, an example of this would be any of which of those, like different plants, different types of grasses, which are all the same species, but different types of them. Different types of insects, all the beetles. There's 420,000 types of beetles, which is just wild. Frogs, things like that. All the bacteria types, there's a lot of those. So those are just some examples. So in between species. And then there's differences, differences occur between species. And then, obviously, so species then, go back. Okay. Between different species, right? So in this case, the butterfly is clearly different than the frog, right? Clearly different from this bird. So that's inter. However, variations occur within species as well. So these different types of dogs. So intra. So these are your intra, so in between species. So within each species itself, basically. So these dogs would be a good example. But why does it exist even? And so that's what we'll get into now. Something called variation survival. So it's something, so we all know what it is. Sexual reproduction. So is the main cause of it from these differences in the species itself. Inter and intra, because of the reproduction, the way the parents of the species itself. So in sexual reproduction, offspring inherit 50% of their DNA from each parent, resulting in a new combination of genes and therefore new characteristics. So even look at if you have siblings, between your parents and you and your siblings, there are differences because you get 50% of each of your parents' genetics, and it's not going to be the same as your siblings. So it'll be different based on which ones were passed down. Okay. Then there's something called adaptions. So adaptions are variations that give an individual a better chance of surviving to reproduce will be passed on to offspring. So through generations, this variation will become more and more common in a particular population, and those are called adaptations. So adaptations basically are the variation, so any mutation or whatever. So in the case of giraffes, if you look at the giraffes, they believe that originally the giraffes were really short. and they couldn't eat anything and they didn't have enough food. So over time, their necks got longer and longer so they could actually get food off the tall trees. That would be an adaptation. So they had to adapt to the fact that they had to eat from the tall trees. So they grew longer necks and they adapted, right? And so over time, they just got longer and longer necks. I'm not saying it's always, that's just what they observed. But yes, so that's an adaptation. So something that can change to increase survival in terms of eating, in terms of walking, things like that. So if you can't, yeah, so like that. Mutations then. So the genetics of this, we'll be going through genetics a little bit more. I believe I can't remember if it's next. It might even be next. In order to reproduce the DNA within the nucleus of the cell, if you remember doing the last time, the nucleus was the center that held all your DNA. The DNA must first replicate and divide. Something called mitosis and meiosis, but we'll get to that a little bit later. We'll do that in another presentation. The process of DNA replication is not perfect, and mistakes are often made. Small changes in the genetic code are referred to as mutations and result in changes in gene expression. So mutations are another form of variation. So the original sequence here, this is this is your DNA here, half of it anyway. This here produces brown eyes. But when you change this thymine to a cytosine, now you get blue eyes. So one little change will create blue eyes. So all it takes is one little change, one little difference, and you'll create something totally different. Yeah. You don't have to know much about the DNA yet. We will get into that another day. And we're not, we'll see how much detail we get to that. So, well, that one, the eye color, isn't a bad variation. It can be good. It's just the color of the eyes, right? Others can lead, so while some mutations lead to beneficial variations like the eye color, other can be harmful or even benign. So benign would be something that makes you sick, right? So like if someone is colorblind, and this is quite often only happens in males, very rarely in females, because it is X-linked. Not so. But the color blindness is caused by mutation on the gene encoding on the retinas of our eyes. So while this offers no advantage in terms of survival, it's not harmful in any way. It's not going to hurt us. It's just you can't see colors. So there's different forms. There's red, green. I know someone who sees in black and white. There's things like that. Most of it's red, green, which is unfortunate with your driving. But that's okay. You ever tried to match clothes when you're colorblind and you can't see the colors? It's very difficult. So men usually get it, or males usually get it, because it's held on the X chromosome, and females don't often get color blindness unless both parents are colorblind or carry the gene for color blindness. People often ask me if I'm colorblind because I can't match a color to save my life, but I'm not. I can see every color. I just can't match them. There you go. You've never met me personally, so I cannot match color. Don't ask. My husband doesn't even ask me. He can match it better than I can. So that would be a non-harmful one. But a harmful one could be something called sickle cell anemia. It's a mutation of your blood cells. So it misshapes your blood cells. So sickle cells, so the regular blood cells are like this. They're like ovally shaped with a little hole in them. Sickle cells are like this. They become flat and misshapen. But they cannot carry oxygen, which our normal cells do. and often become clogged in arteries and veins. And they often get people with this, so it's anemia, so it's a low iron, low oxygen as well. People with this often don't survive past adulthood because their blood cells will always be misshapen and they can't get enough oxygen. But in African American people, they actually can carry this gene and not become sick. But what it also does is, actually protect you from malaria. Having sickle cell gene actually protects you from getting malaria. So it helps people over there. It's become beneficial to the people who live over there because the insects that carry the malaria. So it's an adaptation for the people over there. Not everyone has sickle cell, but I'm saying some people can have it, but without even knowing it. The only way they'll know is if their kids get it. Okay. So there's different types of mutations. Something called a neutral mutation, which has no immediate effect on an individual's fitness to survive or reproductive success. They can reproduce, but it doesn't help them later on. Harmful mutations, which reduces an individual fitness, so makes them ill or causes them harm, so makes them not physically fit or well, or even anything like that. A beneficial mutation gives an individual a selective advantage. So that's what you want, but it doesn't always happen. So mutations don't always happen. Some of the traits that we have are considered mutations. But at the same time, we don't notice a difference because that's just what we are, who we are. But that mutation could be in terms of eye color, could be in terms of hand shape, foot shape, skin tone, anything like that. It can be considered a mutation. But the fact that in those cases, it has no effect on anything. It's just the color of something, the way something's shaped. Unless it makes you ill. That's harmful. So misconceptions about mutations. They don't occur when needed. So some people believe that mutations occur when they're needed. They don't. They occur at random, with harmful mutations being more common than beneficial. There's no design to it. It just kind of happens, depending on how it replicates. Another one would be harmful mutations accumulate and degrade the species. So they don't actually do that. Harmful mutations are selected against and therefore do not accumulate over the generations. So the people with any of the traits that are harmful will then be selected against. So those are the ones that aren't going to reproduce in the population of animals. So fittest individuals are favored by the environment. Because if they're harmful, if you're ill or can't do something as well. In terms of animals want certain mates. And so they'll find the perfect mate for them, with the best traits for them to that match, or whatever the case is. Same with humans, but depending on not in the same way. So they are selected against, and they often don't reproduce later on. In terms of animals, evolution is just pure chance. It's another myth. Beneficial mutations, while rare, are selected for and may accumulate over generations. So in terms of the giraffes, so their necks got longer over time. In terms of later when we talk about it, the finches, there's many types of finch. I think there's 14 species of finches on the Galapagos Island, and he studied each one of them, drawing their beaks and looking at how they eat. So their beak tells us how they eat because of the way it's shaped and how big it is and everything like that. So those would be beneficial mutations because they can actually eat different food than their other species. Okay, that's mutations. Now we're going back to natural selection, but it kind of fits here better than it did up there. So it's the one mechanism by which evolution can occur, so changes in the population. So through natural selection, traits that increase an organism's chance of survival to reproduce, age more likely, are more likely to pass on to future generations. And so then over time, these traits become more common and causing the population change over time. So it's important to note that whether or not a particular trait is selected for or against depends entirely on the organism's environment at that time. So the changes in various traits are driven by environmental changes. So if this one trait is favorable and every animal wants this, and then someone decides to build a highway in the middle of their ecosystem. Now what do? Now they've lost half their ecosystem, half their environment, and now what do? They have to adapt and find other ways to eat, other ways to live on whatever side of the highway they ended up on. So now you're going to end up in two ecosystems, but that ecosystem is fragmented. So what it's going to do is not survive as long because they won't be able to cross, won't be able to survive as well because they don't have their whole ecosystem. But in that case, the strongest of those individuals that are in that ecosystem will adapt to the changes that they have. So in that case, traits will be selected for or against depending on the ecosystem that's present. Okay? But this is also why you see deer crossing the road, foxes running across the street on 32nd Street and red deer. Because their ecosystem was broken up by the fact that we have a road right in the middle. So we always see them around. That's all. So I already talked about this. In Africa, leading cause of death is malaria, spread by mosquitoes, which contaminate a person's blood with the disease when they are bitten. However, people with sickle cell anemia have a much higher probability of surviving malaria because their misshapen red cells can't carry the disease throughout their body. So, which is kind of interesting. So in the result, the mutation is actually selected for in this area, but not in areas that we have because we aren't common to have malaria here. I know someone who was a missionary and he's a pastor now, it still is, but he had dengue fever, which would be something very similar over there, something that makes you very, very ill, so they had to come home. But now he's been home ever since. But it's something that makes you very, very ill. Similar like yellow fever, same thing like that. Yeah, you don't want it either way. Yeah. So another example would be skin color. Humans need sunlight to survive, as it permits absorption of vitamin D. However, without any protection from the sun, harsh UV rays could damage our cells. So this is why people get burnt. I'm very pasty. I'll admit that. I'm very white. I get burnt in an hour in the sun, even with sunscreen on. But the UV rays are damaging my cells. They're physically burning the cells underneath my skin. But the absorption of vitamin D. So this is why most doctors will say right now, even adults should be taking vitamin D every day because it helps keep you healthy because you don't get enough sunlight. So they say if you want enough sunlight in the winter, you have to go outside naked for 6 hours in the cold, which does not sound like a good idea unless you're doing a polar dip and you're not even doing that and naked. So I wouldn't advise that. So if you take vitamin D, it'll help you build immunity up in the winter so you don't get as sick. Okay. Even in the summer, we need it because we don't get enough sun here. It doesn't stay warm enough. As opposed to people who in like the tropics, they get enough. They're outside a lot. So that's one natural selection. So so our skin is that protection from the sun, but also the sunscreen will help. It prevents from the UV rays entering burning our skin too much, even though it doesn't work for me, but it works for some people. And some people just get tan, which is unfair. Okay. It's also the reason. So Homo sapiens or humans originate in Africa, where individuals with genetic mutation coding dark skin are more likely to survive and reproduce. It's like if I lived in Africa, I probably wouldn't survive. I'd be so burned or become black, one of the two. And so the people who have darker skin, where the sun is more harsh, generally live near the equator because their skin can take a little bit more of that UV than what we can. So people in the north, like where we are, where sunlight is scarce, tend to be a little bit lighter skinned and have cooler regions. So like winter for 8 months instead of summer for 8 months, right? Things like that, which is why I'm so pasty, because I'm from Alberta and Saskatchewan. So we've talked about natural selection then. So actually, let me go back. Sound effects included. Okay, so we've gone through variation, inheritance, and selection, and time and adaptation, just not being labeled. So the variation was the difference, visible differences. Inheritance was your DNA, like the mutations of it and how it reproduces. So like the sexual reproduction. Selection would be selected for or selected against in a population. Time would be, we didn't really cover that so much, but it happens over a long period of time. Adaptation would be the fact that something has an adapt to a certain environment later on. Okay, you kind of go through them. So here we have, I won't make you fill this out. In your notes will be, the names will be empty and you just have to fill the names with the said, what they found, because that's a lot of writing. So these are the theorists, evolution theorists that helped build the evolution theory. It wasn't just Darwin. It was mostly Darwin and credit to him, but it wasn't just him. So I'm using a new system here. So this is kind of fun. I'm just kind of trying out, see if it works. I'm doing it right off my Google Slides. I don't have to actually record on my phone. Let's see how this works instead. Hopefully it works better. So there is a guy called Buffin. I don't know his first name. His name's Buff. His last name's Buffin. He publicly challenged the idea that life forms are unchanged. He believed that life forms were changed, and he was going to prove it. So he noted similarities between humans and apes, which is where we get the idea that we come from apes. Not just. That's later. So he noted that different regions of Earth have distinct plants and animals despite having similar environments. So that's what he noticed, but he didn't know why it happened or what happened. That likely, different regions of Earth having distinct plants and animals with similar environments, is probably due to Pangea, because the one giant landform now split apart. Now they have similar environments, but some have different plants and animals, and some have similar, depending on what happened with the adaptations. Cuvier, he studied ancient life through fossils, and each stratum has a unique group of fossils. So each species has a unique group of fossils. Deeper than that, the more dissimilar species are from modern life. So the ancient ones are quite different than the ones we see today. He found new species appeared and others disappeared. So this is what he observed. This is what they found. So Lyell then proposed that geological processes operated at the same rates as they do today. So that hasn't changed. So back then, however many years ago you believe it operated the same way as it does now. Theorized that small, subtle changes could happen over a long period of time and could result in substantial changes. He worked with Charles Darwin, okay, which is why his is so similar. So Lamarck then compared current species with fossil forms and observed a line of descent in which a series of fossils led to a modern species. There's a picture of one. We'll see one here. So basically, the fact that I think I have a pen, which is kind of cool. Just a moment. No, that's highlight. Thought I had a pen. Sorry, I'm very enthusiastic about this today. So it's also what time? 10:45 at night. Okay. I have a pointer. I have a caption. Well, I don't want that. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to figure this out. Whatever. I was going to draw it for you. So basically, it looks like a tree with the bark, like the roots, and this. What is it? Sorry, I can't think of the word. The bark of the tree is going to be the one species. And then from there, the species break off into branches coming from the same ancestor. Okay? Leading to one modern species. So the changes happen because an animal passed on off to its offspring, physiological changes it's undergone during its lifetime, based on the survival needs it has. Disuse of an organ would cause it to wither and disappear. Or in terms of our appendix, it's kind of useless until it bursts. Actually, they believe the appendix is part of the immune system, just very, very little amount of it. That's why when it bursts, there's toxins in it, which is why they believe it's part of the immune system. An inheritance of acquired characteristics. So this is like the giraffes. It's just a different way of doing it. Darwin and Wallace, so they worked together first. Populations changed over time. Individuals with traits that helped them in their local environments were more likely to survive and pass these traits to offspring. Competition for a limited resource among individuals of the same species would select for individuals with favorable traits, which increased their chances of surviving to reproduce. This is part of the reason why, like, if you've ever been to the Calgary Zoo, male peacocks have those bright, beautiful feathers that they kind of sprawl everywhere when the females are present, because they want them to see them. Look at me, here I am. Which is also why birds do weird mating dances to get their mates. Or there's a lot of weird mating rituals in animals. Weird things. Yeah. But that's why, because these are favorable traits. They want their offspring to have these said traits. Darwin then, just himself, presented forms of life have arisen by descent and modification from an ancestral species, so like another tree. We'll go through that. Mechanisms for modification is natural selection, working for long periods of time, and showed how populations of individual species have become better adapted to their environment over time. So all this chart does is showing us that it's not just one scientist that has actually come up with this. It's actually a whole bunch of them, which Darwin put together and ultimately made. Like, took credit for, basically. Okay? You don't have to know that. It's just this is showing how it worked out, like how all the scientists that worked towards it. So then, the process of evolution itself is over time. So evolution basically is a process by which new species come into being, which is those 4 traits that we talked about. They're different and things like that. So those 4. And then natural selection then is the mechanism by which evolution occurs. So by which the new species comes about. Okay, which is VISTA. Variation, inheritance, selection, time, and adaptation, which is how evolution comes about, how that change happens. So you will have to fill this in, this little chart. So natural selection acts on individuals. I'm not going to. Individuals with more favorable traits are more likely to survive and reproduce. Observed as selection for or against certain phenotypes. A phenotype is a physical characteristics. Okay. Evolution then acts on population. Favorable traits become more common in a population, causing that population to become genetically different than the others of the same species over time. So it's also observed as significant changes in gene frequencies. But then in the middle, this is a Venn diagram, and this is one side, that's the other. In the middle is both. So they're both driven by environmental changes, is what happens. Okay. Changes to the environment in the fact that the resources are gone, they now have more competition, they have whatever it is. Climate change. What about dinosaurs? Right? Extinction, things like that. Yeah. Oh man. So then, evolution is in action. So the silver fox experiment. Sorry, it's ads, evidently. Okay, so that's the fox. We're almost done. Okay, guys. I won't make you watch this video. It's, yeah, the other one was long. So, evidence of evolution then. So we talked about evolution. Now we need the proof that evolution, or the evidence that they used to prove what they were trying to show. So the evidence that they use is fossil records, patterns of distribution, comparative anatomy, embryology, and genetics, and that which support evolution itself. So let's go through them. So fossil records. So this here is it all called an Arcteratops, or I can't remember what it's called. It's the first full dinosaur that they found in a fossil. Basically, that's what that is. Fossils are formed from sedimentary rock, with fossils which help provide a glimpse into the history of life by showing species that were alive in the past. So these fossils show us exactly what was present there. There's three important pieces of evidence. So the layering. So fossils found in earlier layers and closer to the surface are more similar to species alive today than fossils found in deeper, older layers of rock. Which makes sense because the older rock would be lower on as rock builds up. The order. So the order that fossils appear in the rock layers makes a difference. So the ancestors in first species we found in older rocks, which would lie beneath the rocks of younger species. So as you go up, you get older fossils. So when you go from the ground, you go from the base of the rock. You get older species, and then as you go up, you get younger species. And same thing in the age, you can tell the order that they were fossilized. So the appearance of them. Not all our organisms appear at a fossil record at the same time. Fish are found to be the oldest vertebrates, and the subsequent layers are fossils of younger, older vertebrates. So fish all the way up to the younger. Vertebrates are anything with bones. Yeah. Invertebrates are anything without bones. Okay. And something called transitional fossils. The fossil record only gave a snapshot of evolution. It didn't really show us what was happening. And it caused people to question the validity of it. But the discovery of transitional fossils, oh man, helped us show the links between groups of organisms. It helped us understand the process and relationship between groups of organisms. A lot of this led to a lot of like the food chains that you see in some of like the older food chains. The fossils helped us because you could see what they were eating as well. Okay, so fossil records are huge. Another thing for evolution for fossils would be skulls, like monkey skulls, ape skulls, things like that. So the similarities between that and the human skull is actually quite amazing. It's quite similar, and they use that to, not the only piece, but to try and show that humans could come from monkeys because they adapted to the changes around them. So then, patterns of distribution. So biogeography is the study of the past and the present geographical distributions of organisms. So this is Darwin and Wallace, that species evolved in one place and then spread out to other regions. So there's 4 ways this is supported. Geographically close regions are more likely to have similar species of organisms, which would make sense. Animals found on islands often closely resemble animals found on the closest continent, which is evidence for Pangea because the animals came from the island. Animals came from the big landmass, and then the landmass separated. The same will be for these last 2. Oh man, sorry, that's in the way. So C, fossils of the same species can be found on neighboring coastlines because of the Pangea. I can't read it, the thing's in the way. Closely related species are almost never found in the same location or habitat because they probably need the same resources or the same whatever they need. The competition was too much. So one left and the other one stayed so they could both survive. Okay. Something called comparative anatomy. So species that are closely related tend to have a lot of structural differences. This is the skulls for our monkeys. This is the gorilla, the chimpanzee, and the human. You can see the teeth are quite similar. The jaw is similar. The only difference would be the physical skull itself. And that changed. But there's 2 different types of structures for this. There's something called analogous and analogous and homologous structures. So analogous structures will serve similar purposes, but that have evolved separately a number of different times. So in terms of this, a shark has a fin. And if you look, it's the same, similar, so it has a fin shape, and it has a set of bones or cartilage in there. A penguin, which is a bird, has a wing with feathers around it and bones. A dolphin, then, a mammal, has something very similar. It has an outer protective layer with bones and cartilage underneath it for the flipper. But all similar uses. They all need them to swim, but they look just slightly different. So these are analogous structures, which serve similar purposes, but then evolve separately a number of different times. So they look different. Okay. This does not indicate evolutionary relationships. This doesn't tell us that, this is evidence that these are all related. That doesn't tell us that. Analogous would be different. Homologous would be the same. So homo being the same. So structures would serve different purposes, but are anatomically similar. So in terms of a human, an arm, the bones, the hand, we use that to pick up things and do whatever we do with our hands. A cat, it looks very similar, but they use them to walk on. A whale, this is their fin, uses them to swim. A bat, which is very similar, uses that to fly. So they look very similar in terms of appendages, but they serve different purposes. So this indicates evolutionary relationships because they're all similar, but they are slightly different. Make sense? Kind of? Yeah. So analogous is different. No, different, similar purposes, different structure. Homologous is different purpose, similar structure. Okay. There's something called embryology. So the analysis of developing embryos has revealed significant similarities between closely related species. Embryology is possibly the most important evidence of evolution that demonstrates how tiny changes in protein signaling during development can result in large-scale changes. So this is a fish. If you look right here, we all look very similar. This is the embryo. But as we develop, you can see it gets different. But we all look kind of similar here, minus the fish. The fish is different, but the embryo is the same. Okay? So these are the turtle, the bird, the pig, and the man are all very similar until you get to here, where the shape of the face is different. And the fact that a turtle has a tail and a bird has a slight tail. We have a tail. It's our tailbone. It's just very small. So to look at the embryos, the fact that they're very similar between related species tells us that they change just slightly based on what we needed, like the adaptations. Okay. Genetics. DNA analysis of close related species supports the idea that we share a common ancestor. So we have all the monkeys have 24 pairs of chromosomes, and we have 23. Okay. So this is what I was talking about, those trees. So here, this is why they believe we came from monkeys. So it looks like a tree. So this is the common ancestor, like gorillas, monkeys, chimpanzees, things like that. And then you go up. So here you have the orangutan is the present day. So you go up. You keep going. Here you have the gorilla in the present day. Here now you split off. So you have humans, and then you have chimpanzees and bonobo. So these circles are common ancestors. So they use DNA to do this. You know, we have 90% similarity DNA to a banana. Right? Crazy. But yeah, we're not related. We just have similar DNA because of the same proteins that are present. And we eat them. So there you go. So DNA analysis has also been used to trace the movement of the human species across the globe. So as you go, so they started down here, and then you can see, based due to genetics, where people have gone. This is where ancestry DNA comes from. This is how they use it. So they can trace where you came from based on your DNA itself. Because they know what the DNA of the people who live on all the other places, what they look like. That's how they can tell. Okay. There's something called Lamarckian evolution. Remember that guy who came up with, the inherited characteristics or the acquired characteristics? So this is the giraffe. So originally it's a short neck. He just keeps stretching and stretching until he can reach the taller branches. So it's driven by the fact that he needed to get longer. So the difference between Lamarckian and the Darwinism is Lamarckian is driven by interchanges, so something that needs to happen. As opposed to Darwin or evolution would be it's not based on what needs to happen. It's a matter of what needs to change as well. So what needs to change, and it's a variety. So they don't know how it's going to change until that mutation happens, right? So that's different. So interchange. So it needs to it needs to happen so I can do this. But when Darwin, it's a mutation, it's a variation instead of a need. It's very close, but yeah. There's something called modern evolutionary theory. So they not really changed it, but they just looked at how they change. So since Darwin, there's something called gradualism, which states that gradual changes occur steadily in a linear manner. So this is gradualism. So gradually changes as you go. So here you start the common ancestor, you go up. So it changes, goes up, it branches out. So it's gradually changing at a steady rate. The fossil record, though, however, supports the model of punctuated equilibrium, which is this. It's the fact that evolutionary equilibrium are interrupted by periods of speciation. Speciation, we'll go through that in the next slide, events often follows periods of mass extinction. So here, big change, big branch. Right here, another branch up, another branch up. So big changes happen here, here, and here. So here was a major one, so it'd be a big split, and then it went up. So here is interrupted periods. So like craters, it could be ice age, it could be anything like that caused the extinction of a lot of animals. So then this is a different version. So this is gradualism, so gradually changes as time goes on. This here, this butterfly changes dramatically into the orange one, that one changes darker, that one changes into this one. Okay, so that is gradualism and punctuated equilibrium. So now something called speciation. Speciation, the formation of two new species from a single population, is generally driven by changes in the environment, generally geographical barriers. So genetic variation is present prior to such change, but only when specific variations increase the chance of survival, do not become more common in population. Eventually, populations become so different they can no longer interbreed. So basically, speciation is a separation, the formation of two new species from a single population that are so different that they can't breed again. So often by continents or seas or anything like that. So that's why the islands will often have a different species than something else. Like Galapagos isn't really connected to much else. So that's why certain things are only present there and not anywhere else. So geographic isolation leads to reproductive isolation. There's not really much change if there's geographic isolation. Okay? Computer, what are you doing? And there's something called survival of the fittest, which you've probably heard of, and it kind of covers one of the points. Suggested that organisms best adjusted to their environment are most successful in surviving and reproducing. Okay. Darwin did not consider the process of evolution as a survival of the fittest. It's just a mechanism. But he regarded it as a survival of the fitter because of struggle for existence. So they had to adapt to survive. But the fittest, the ones with the best traits, survived the most and actually reproduced. I think that's it. Okay, cool. So what I need you to do then is I will be sending you the Google form again so you can fill that out. Please do that. Please do. There will be 3 this week, so please do all 3. And they will all come off the slides, and you can do them off of there. All the other assignments, please do the space and earth science one. That definitely needs to be done. And I don't believe anyone's done it yet, but I would love for you to do it. If you have any question about evolution, please let me know. This is a brief, it is a lot of it, but it's quite brief in what it is. But yeah, we did go through most of what is out there. If you look it up on Google, you'll get a lot. And some you may not understand. There's so much stuff out there for evolution, and natural selection, things like that. So if you have any questions, please ask. I will give you a hand the best I can. If you have any questions about anything else, please ask. Yeah. Thank you for listening to this and have a great day.